So the next segment is a panel discussion. It's going to be moderated by Syed, followed by a panel of distinguished speakers. I'm going to just introduce Syed right now. Syed Mubarak is the Vice Chairman and Head of ESG Work Group, Smart Cities Network. He has been a sustainability and engineering veteran with over 30 years of proven experience in leading the change within organizations to adopt technologies, innovation to adopt business processes, improvement and stakeholder engagement to future-proof assets. Specifically like this, he specializes in realizing sustained earnings and achieving triple bottom line goals: people, planet, and profit with purpose. He's a recipient of CSR Award, ASHRAE Technology Award, and published several papers on decarbonization and technologies. He holds ISO certifications in areas of sustainability, environment management, asset management, quality, and safety. Let's put our hands to welcome Syed to the stage, please. Next up, we have our panelist speaker, Kee Wei Hui, Director in Development Advisory, Lead Work Dynamics at Jones Lang LaSalle. She's a Director in Development Advisory, Lead Work Dynamics at JLL, leading up for sustainability in developments for investor clients. Wei Hui focuses on driving highest and best use through sustainability and project development strategies for owner-occupied and investor-related development projects. She is JLL's official representative to Singapore Green Building Council, SGBC, and is also SGBC's appointed technical committee representative. Let's welcome her on stage, please. We also have Mr. Kenneth Ng, Global Sustainability Lead from Razer Inc. Kenneth is a seasoned sustainability professional with over a decade of experience in managing sustainability campaigns. He has worked with stakeholders from over 30 countries, incorporating profitable businesses with sustainable solutions and community investments. Kenneth's scope of work includes setting up green financing frameworks, ESG reporting standards and criteria, decarbonization of business operations across different regions. His recent stint with a French multinational energy company involved him with mapping and execution of a roadmap leading up more than 75% of its emissions before 2030. Let's put a hand and welcome Kenneth to the stage, please. Last but not least, we've got Geeta Gopal, which is the COO at Verdana. She is an accomplished senior management professional based in Singapore. She's a PMI Future 50 awardee, a master's from Oxford, and a sought-after public speaker. We are very privileged to have her with us this morning. She's currently the Chief Operating Officer at Verdana, where she leads their overall operations, projects, sales, IT partnerships, and customer relations. And with that, we have our segment today that will dive into ESG and sustainability and what it means to business. Please, Syed, take it away.
Thank you. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hashtag and Renee, for setting up the stage for this very important subject, ESG and sustainability. And thank you all for joining today. So, ESG sustainability is one of the very hot topic, as like how the weather is hot outside. And that's exactly what we're going to delve in today with the prominent and very distinguished speakers here, Wei Hui, Kenneth, and Geeta. Before I start, let me set a context. ESG word was coined in 2005. It's looking at any organizations, companies, from an external point of view, from a risk management, risk mitigation, and of course, increasing stakeholder and shareholder value. On the contrary, sustainability was formed in 1972, almost 50 over years ago. It's all looking from an inside out of the company or a corporation or even a government and cities context. How we can make sure the people, the community can be sustainable. As I mentioned in the beginning that people, planet, profit with purpose. So today, the latest announcement from IPCC 2022 report states that although in 2015 we signed up for 1.5 degree Celsius temperature decrease, pre-industrial era. Having said that, after 7-8 years, although 2030 goals are in the forefront and 2050 goals are a little bit longer than awaited, we are not going to meet 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the risk is already there. 30 years ago, we will be calling it risk management. Then we call risk mitigation. Today, we are talking about risk adoption. So the risk is there. How are we going to adapt? And how are we going to change ourselves so that we can bring a better future for us and also for our future generation? So with this, let me start with Wei Hui, and of course followed by Kenneth and Geeta to introduce by themselves, 1 or 2 minutes about yourself and what you do in your organization and how ESG sustainability is very important within your organization or for your stakeholders. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Syed. Again, thank you, Renee and Hashtag for having this amazing event and all of you here this morning. I know it's the middle of the week with blazing 37 degrees over the weekend. It's a nice, cool 25 in here right now. So, well, I think ESG or sustainability, as we all know today, is no longer something that is foreign, it's no longer something that is good to have, and it's definitely not something that probably we can sweep it under the carpet till the next board meeting. It is on every C-suite's top agenda. And for myself, as you know, really shared very briefly earlier on, I head up development advisory at Jones Lang LaSalle. I'm an architect by profession. I started doing green buildings way back, and I was just chatting with Syed earlier on that in the past, a green building is about having a green wall or a courtyard somewhere, right? And that kind of qualifies as a green building. But when we talk about sustainability today, we are talking about how it can actually make not just financial sense, but environmental and social impacts for the greater good. So when we actually speak with clients in my day-to-day job, investor or owner-occupier clients, we are really looking at bringing the highest and best use of their asset, such that it's not just leveraging something that they already have, but how we can actually recontribute into their whole ecosystem where they can not just make a profit, but it creates social and environmental impacts as well on their portfolios. So what do I actually mean by this? For instance, show of hands, how many of you know what is the percentage of real estate contribution to the world's carbon? Option A, 10%. Option B, 40%. Option C, 100%.
Anyone knows about it?
A, who's for A? 10%? Who's for B? 40%? And who for C? 100%. We are huge contributors. Yeah, so I think most of you got it right there, is 40%. So if you think about it, real estate accounts for 40% of all carbon used in the world, and we definitely have to have a roof over our heads, right? I can't ask everyone to live in tents. Everyone will be using real estate in one way or another. So that actually makes the job of decarbonization and helping clients achieve sustainability goals all the more meaningful. The very building that we inhabit, we use, how can we make actually business sense in actually making it not just for you, for I, the planet, but more importantly for the future without incapacitating their purpose in sustaining it for the greater good?
Thank you. Kenneth?
Yeah, very good morning to all of you here. My name is Kenneth. Thanks, Renee, from Hashtag for inviting me. Very honored to be here. I think it's a place of innovation, and I do agree with what we just mentioned. I think it's very important that we want to communicate sustainability properly, because for the longest time, sustainability is about telling people not to consume something, but in Razer, we want to tell people that we can actually consume, but we must consume with reduction in mind. And it's up to the brands and the companies to actually make this accessible for the consumers. So for the day-to-day work I do in Razer, first of all, when we want to communicate about sustainability, we must first walk the talk. So Razer is one of the very aggressive science-based target adopters. We adopt a 1.5 degree scenario. So that means at least 4.2% absolute reduction year on year. And we also want to decarbonize our products because we are living in an age where our consumers are very, very enlightened. They don't just buy products based off advertisement. They do their research. They go on the hardware zone to actually check out products and stuff. So we want to make sure that we do not fool them. We actually help them to decarbonize. So the products that they buy are made of recycled material. And when they buy into a product, they're not just buying, they're not just establishing a relationship with us on one single product, but they're buying into an ecosystem of repairing, extending life cycle of the products, and also to at the product's end of life, how do we actually make this recyclable and circular again? And of course, other aspect of my work includes looking into green investments, because we have a war chest of $50 million to invest in startups with very good ideas. We want to help them go to market faster, upskill quicker, and how we can help them actually further enhance and develop their solutions. And of course, Razer, we are the world's largest hardware, software, and services ecosystem for gamers. We have around 200 million gamers in our ecosystem. So the example I always like to share is that for gamers, they're actually very passionate. In 2019, there's a UN paper about the next frontier for climate action. So because there are around 3.2 billion gamers around the world. So they are the future leader, they are the young generations, and if we can rally them towards a single focused goal of decarbonizing and climate action, we can really bring net zero into a reality. Yeah, so very happy to be with all of you. Look to contributing more later.
Thank you. Geeta, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Geeta Gopal. Thanks for the opportunity, Renee and Hashtag, and also Syed, who introduced me to this wonderful panel. So I am a tech person by heart. So I'm from IT infrastructure, and what am I doing in sustainability is I've taken on this new role to help Verdana as the Chief Operating Officer and also the Chief IT and Tech Officer. And what are they doing? They are trying to digitize the carbon trade. So as the speakers earlier mentioned, and as Syed also gave elaborate explanation on why this is an important topic, my job for my organization is to ensure we digitize carbon management as much as possible. So what are we doing? We are digitalizing the measurement, reporting, and verification. So the first step, to go on to solving the world's real problems is to see where we are right now, right? Because without measurement, we don't know where we are. And when we don't know where we are, we cannot sort ourselves and we cannot handle the problems that we have. And so that's my job now. And what we focus on is actually commercial facilities, because Rennie rightly mentioned that most of the emissions happens in commercial facilities stage. But are we putting enough efforts on the commercial facilities? The answer is no. I've done my research to see that most of the investments, most of the focus happens on areas like agriculture, reforestation, and so on. Very few people invest in commercial facilities carbon management. So that's also something that we are trying to solve. And when we tackle 40% of the problem, right, I think most of the reduction will start from there, and that will be an influencing factor for the rest of the industries. And the third point that I want to mention is how do you integrate technology with the real world problems? Right? That's something that I always think about. Like, technology is not here to make just our lives easier, but at the end of it, what problems are we trying to solve? How much are we solving on those problems? What is the measurement? How can we see where we are? Where are we progressing towards? I'm trying to tie technology with this process so that people, the stakeholders, it can be from any industry, not just commercial facilities days, any industry can measure themselves on this journey. So I think we can, I would say I'll compliment both of you in your green financing journeys and commercial facilities energy efficiency journey. And let's see what I can contribute here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. I think we heard loud and clear, we need to go beyond green wall if we want to decarbonize. Number two, really need to walk the talk. Third, you have to digitalize it because you have to measure if you want to manage it effectively. So as we speak, today, the overall carbon emission globally stands at 424 ppm, which is almost, compared to 1950, which is 355 ppm, is accelerated significantly. Of course, during COVID, in 2020, we saw a dip around 3 to 4%. But post-COVID, again, we can see that there are 3 to 4% increase. And then we are back to square, and then we keep on accelerating, right? So although someone asked me why I'm wearing black today, while she's wearing a green, I told, of course, she's a green girl today here. But I'm wearing black that we are still not eliminating carbon. So we really need to work harder to reduce carbon. So that is one of the key contributors for climate change. So if you look at World Economic Forum report annually, the last 10 years, or maybe 15 years, two key threats are always to the humanity. One is the climate change. Number two is the cybersecurity. I know yesterday we talked a lot about cybersecurity. Today we talk about climate change and how it is important to the business. So let me start with Wei Hui. Of course, it's open for everyone. Because we'll start with the why. Why ESG and sustainability is important to the business. What it really drives for businesses to embrace ESG sustainability in the context of operation, in the context of investment, and in the context of reporting. So probably, Wei Hui, do you want to start first?
Yeah, so definitely, I'm sure all of you know about our very famous carbon tax in Singapore. Right? We're looking at carbon tax shooting up the roof in the next 5 years, and that's going to hold, and the future figures are still unknown. So we're talking about a top $80 per ton, okay, very soon, and that's just a couple of years' time. So you imagine the amount of carbon that is generated, say, from real estate. When we actually do a building, when we build a building, we're talking about not just embodied carbon that is with the building, we are talking about new carbon that is pumped in. So carbon takes in the form of your construction materials, comes in the form of the trucks that brings in the fuel, the manpower, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this accounts for that. And not to mention the operational carbon that the building emits after it's being completed. So I'm saying in more generic terms here. After this session, if you want to find out more, we can have a separate chat, trying to keep it non-technical as far as possible so that everyone gets the story. So when we actually look at all these factors when we already have an existing development, when we already have an existing asset, there is already carbon to start. So we have already started from a base. When we actually retrofit it, or in local terms, we call it additions and alterations to a building, to future-proof it, to make it suitable for today's needs, we actually remove a huge chunk of carbon that is required if we were to build brand new. Yeah? So in that sense, it makes a lot of economical sense for clients and investors or owner-occupiers to rethink their portfolio. What can I do with the existing assets that I have? Do I really need to tear it down? Can I just do interventions in certain ways to future-proof it, to bring it to speed, and at the same time save carbons for myself, for the planet, and for everyone? So that is typically the top question that clients come to us with their portfolios. They'll continue buying assets, right? That's the reason why we have high ABSD, but anyway, that's a side thing, that's for another day. But the truth is that when we actually see a building, what do we actually need to do? Do we do a minor intervention? Do we do a major intervention? Or do we do something that is drastic like a new build? That is where we actually measure up the kind of returns of investments that the clients do. So if they plunk in $10 million, for example, what are the kind of returns and paybacks? Do they help save the planet? For example, if we use more efficient chillers versus old ones, if we use solar panels to generate 20-30% of the grid, if we get renewables, if we change to more efficient lighting, if we measure the data of a building, for instance, will we then know how much do we need to top up to get the new baseline? And another interesting thing that actually comes in from real estate is there's something called a cram curve. So every country has a carbon reader, real estate monitor curve that is measured against all its buildings. So buildings that we stay today, that is green, it has photovoltaic cells, it has all the tick boxes, may in time to come become a stranded asset. I mean, that's the terminology we use in real estate. Stranded means it no longer meets the requirements of the future. So something that was, say, certified with many stars 10 years ago, today is no longer that premium star because every building has caught up. And you can imagine from now to, say, the next 5 to 10 years, that building is going to be outperformed by new buildings from the market. Hence, there is this continual race, there's this continual need to make sure that all buildings are being sustainable and future-proof in the whole decarbonization path. I hope I'm not boring you with too much carbon here, but
Yeah.
No, I will pick on later some of the questions, some of the statistics you shared. Let's hear from Kenneth or Geeta.
May I add just one point? Because you very beautifully touched on buildings, how it's always a matter of time. A great building today, 5 years down the lane, is not the same because there is a wear and tear, and also subsequently carbon emission shoots up. So that is precisely, I think, where technology and data can play a role in deciding what kind of emissions management do we have to invest on. Is emissions management even warranted for those buildings? The buildings which look very nice outside, nice facade and everything, but inside, how good is it as the building is performing from a carbon management or carbon emissions perspective? And that is where I think data and technology can play a big role, and all companies should invest in these things so that as part of their green initiative. So again, tying on to my point of data and technology.
Absolutely, Geeta, absolutely. Because without tracking, we will not know what we have and what we have used and what's the deficit.
Yeah, just that point. Thank you.
And I also think that it's actually very important because I think the landscape for the business to operate in, to be more sustainable has changed. So like when I was in this sustainability field 10 years ago, to ask any company to decarbonize their buildings, you can't even imagine it because they will say that, I need to put in Capex to change the light bulbs, to install solar panel. But the technology has moved on so fast, and it has actually been a cost to the company if we don't decarbonize. Yeah. So I use a very simple example. If you list any products on Amazon.com, your products will be ranked in a very unfavorable manner if you don't have eco standards, independently verified eco labels. So that has a direct impact to the business, and I think this has already changed the way people view business. And of course, like what Wei Hui say, right? Like every ton of carbon that you cannot reduce, you're likely going to be taxed with the rising carbon tax that's coming. That's actually translate to very direct P&L. So I think it's very important to look at the triple bottom line that Saya always talk about: the planet, people, and of course profit. Because when it makes sense for the planet and people, it will also make sense for your company. I just want to talk a little bit about the landscape where we operate the business has also changed a lot. In the past, a lot of companies are looking for sustainability reporting talents. So people who know how to do annual report, know how to actually decarbonize, how to report on the carbon emissions. But increasingly, we find that portion has been automated and digitized. We are looking for more people to actually work on the ground to actually decarbonize the buildings, decarbonize operations, decarbonize the factory line. So there's a fundamental change in how business operate. And I think it's important to get on the bandwagon really early, else there will be cost implications and in fact the bottom line of the company.
Thank you, Kenneth. I think I'm going to touch further again on the built environment because all three of them talk heavily on that. And although it is one of the biggest contributor of the overall carbon emission globally against other 6 sectors, right? As we know that today, almost 55% of people, population, lives in the urban world. In the next 2 decades to come, that will accelerate to 65%, meaning that almost we are going to add another 200 billion square meter of built environment space, as per IEA prediction. And today we are almost 280 billion square meter, meaning that by 2050, overall built environment globally could be around 500 billion square meter. So the addition of that new space is going to increase overall carbon emission from embodied carbon and operational carbon. On the contrary, all the existing buildings, whatever we have today, will live until 2040, almost 2/3 of the building. So what we're going to work on the existing building and how we're going to decarbonize new building. So while regulatory pressures are building up, carbon tax, as Wei He has mentioned about accelerating, although it is happening in Singapore, but how it's happening in other part of the ecosystem within ASEAN or Southeast Asia, right? And what technology the built environment can adapt to decarbonize, right? Number one. Number two, what kind of investment required and how investors can be facilitated to make sure that there is a reasonable return and there is a longevity in it, right? Appreciate if all of you can touch on investment point of view, technology point of view, and reporting point of view. Who want to start first? Okay, Kenneth, you want to start? Yeah.
From the investment point of view, I think it's actually very exciting space. We noticed there's an uptick in a lot of green innovations, and I think there's a vacuum in a lot of solutions out there. And I think it's actually a very good time to look into startups who have solutions which can go to market faster. We also for Razer, we're actually looking for startups which has a life cycle assessment approach in mind. So basically, to actually help decarbonize different product stages, or in terms of products or services. So one of the startups that we actually invested in is actually Bamboo. Because so the Bamboo wasn't actually profitable at the point in time when we invested in them, but it has since expanded to Europe and US and Korea, North Asia sites. We actually put our PR marketing engine to actually help them grow. But at the same time, the reason why we look into them is actually because they actually look at the life cycle approach of products that we use on day-to-day basis, and they are managed to cut down 70% of the carbon footprint. So imagine you use a piece of paper, but the paper is 70% less carbon emission. So I think increasingly more companies will also take the life cycle approach because carbon accounting is really a thing. So they will want to look into solutions to decarbonize, and whenever they can't decarbonize internally, they will want to put their money into startup and solutions which they can decarbonize more. Yeah.
Thank you. Geeta?
Yeah. So to add on to that, I think let's take, you mentioned about investments, right? So, and where do we invest? Is it like, are we investing in buying carbon offsets? It's a wrong mindset, right? I think Singapore is very right when it implemented the carbon tax, right? Instead of offset mentality, the first mindset should be, where can I reduce? Rather than buying carbon and offsetting. And the recent, in January, when the reports of about 90% of the carbon credits that were generated by certain standards were proven to be fake or under question, why did that happen when we think about it? That's simply because there was not proper accounting. There was not enough digitalization of what had happened. So going back and verifying them and trying to prove credibility for all that is not going to work. And so think of the people who have invested millions of dollars in those carbons, and then you wake up and find out 90% of that is fake, right? So it's like really a race that is going nowhere, simply because accounting is not done properly, accounting is not digitized, and that is one point. Then the second point, again, coming back to Singapore's carbon tax, I think that's the right way to go. Until we penalize, investments are going to happen in the wrong areas, right? People will not want to pay tax, but then people will start thinking, what else can we do to reduce our own emissions? And that is, again, where data and technology can come in. That's some of my thoughts on this.
Thank you, Geeta.
On the investment side.
You may want to touch on the investment occupier point of view,
Yeah.
and what are the expectations from the investor, and if you can share some use cases, it will be really helpful for the audience.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I mean, I'm sure all of you here invest in one thing or another, right? So for investors, the keyword is, when are you exiting? How long are you holding the building for? Next year? 3 months? 5 years? 10 years? yeah, or depending on market. So there are all these questions and always a varied moving parts when we actually speak with our investor clients who are having a certain development portfolio. So the kind of technologies or investments that they put in must be able to reap fruits for them. Like for example, in JLL, we noticed that buildings who adopted green measures can actually chalk up premiums from 6 to 7%, both on the rent and the sell front. Okay, so but that 6% or 6 to 7% that we are talking about, how does it then measure back to the upfront capex that the investor has actually plugged in? So that becomes the question mark. So again, that always depends on their whole period. An investor that typically comes to us may or may not future-proof the building from A to Z at a go. It's typically in tranches, right? Okay, let me pump this in for the next 3 years and let's see what are the numbers that we are looking at. Is it in the green or are we getting light green? You know, that sort of scenario. And that's where data plays a huge part, because when they start seeing their power bills drop, when they start seeing their occupancy levels increase, that becomes the benchmark that the building was successful and it's time to look at the second tranche. Yeah. So this is typically where we come in and how we actually seek or discuss with investors on what they actually do. So recently we helped an MNC, I can't name names due to the very thick NDA that I signed, but there's a Grade A building somewhere in Raffles Place. So that building in its heydays had all the boxes, right? It was Green Mark Platinum, it had the best this, best that, so on and so forth. Okay? 20 years down, that building is no longer that great. They are losing tenants to neighboring buildings. And if you take a walk down CBD, you will see how every building is undergoing a facelift and A all the time, right? Action never stops. And it's based on this very fundamental reason that in order to keep the asset alive, literally, there are nips and tucks that needs to be done. Quite literally, you see. And that in today's context, falls in the realm of sustainability. When your building is sustainable, when it promotes wellness, when it promotes inclusivity, when it promotes biophilic functions, you get retention of staff, you get occupancy levels, everybody wants to have a space there, and so on and so forth. So that's really how that whole investment sense comes in for every building. Yeah.
Thank you. I know a lot of time we spoke about investment and the E aspect of ESG. Now I really will dive into G, governance, because environmental social can be achieved when a proper governance are put in place. You know, so what do you think, all of you, what are the regulatory frameworks that are available in Singapore and global level, which drives businesses to pursue a proper governance mechanism so that they can contribute to the environmental reduce the environmental degradation, at the same time embracing inclusivity on a social point of view? So maybe, Kenneth, do you want to start how you address from a Razor's point of view, and also what are your thoughts in a global level happening in this context?
Yeah, so I think governance is actually a very important part of the ESG equation, because you can talk a lot about how you want to decarbonize, how you want to be inclusive, but if there's no proper check and balance in place, it's not going to happen. So this is a very direct and intuitive point to all. So I think internally for Razor, what we want to look at is, first of all, we want to create an ecosystem within our manufacturers and suppliers to actually to be able to actually advance the ESG progress with us. So first of all, we must have the proper check and balance. They must, beyond disclosing carbon emissions, they must also adhere with the prevailing standards. So from the manufacturing industry, there's a lot of regulations like substance of very high concerns, what's the carbon footprint, what's the ecotoxicity. So there's a lot of interest, and I think the emerging legislation is actually a very challenging and scary thing. So one day you ship your product into Europe, the next day you're being banned. So starting from January 2024, if you ship high carbon intensity products, you can't ship it into Europe because it's part of the carbon leakage legislation. So I think we probably know, because cement is one of the lists. Yeah, so I think businesses are required to decarbonize or make it carbon neutral before they ship into Europe. And likewise, consumer electronics, like the PCB boards that we're looking at, and increasingly they will move on to finished products. So governance, in a sense that keeping abreast of the latest legislation, be it on diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainable development goals, and also ESG standards that we all look into. I think it's actually very important because we do not want to affect business. We want to defend our bottom line.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on this. One is from governance across the world. Right, I was in the Climate Data Summit in Lisbon, and I was in an analyst session. So I was listening to the analysts present the data on what's happening in the world from a governance perspective. One of my observations from the data was Europe seemed to be on top of that list in everything. And US and the other countries, Asia, were on the lower scale. If you see as, from a GDP or economy perspective, Europe is not better than the North America, for that matter. But from a climate commitment, they were on top of that list simply because European Union has made it stringent for the last decade. Climate action they have made climate action stringent for the last decade, and that shows in the data, right? And so that is a governance as a group, how they are putting in place. And when compared to the other countries, I think that is something that we can learn on, which is the only reason why they are so advanced, right? The infrastructure in Europe is already ready for all the digitalizations. This is another observation, simply because governments have, the different European Union governments have made it mandatory for buildings and facilities to comply with those regulations. So they have to invest in those things. That is one point. Right? Second, on the governance perspective, let's not talk about creating new frameworks and so on. There are already so much that is in place from my research that I'm uncovering, that simply by complying with those, like people from World Bank have invested heavily on this. They have done, like the R&D work, the investments are already there. All we need to do is find the right, methodologies to comply with, the frameworks to comply with, and simply comply with them, by which you can see results. That is another thought process that I have. And for example, again, I talk a lot about data. I'll take the Climate Action Data Trust, the CAT Trust by World Bank. So what are they trying to do? They are trying to bring different sources of information into one multi-hub or platform so that it is open source. The data available there is pumped in from all the places into one multi-hub or meta layer, and there is transparency that they are creating. And simply by supporting these initiatives, I think we'll be one step ahead.
Thank you, Geeta. Wei Hui.
Yeah, so, I think many of you may have come across a couple of reporting standards that are widely used in Singapore, worldwide: GRI, SASB, MSCI, TCFD, blah, 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 right? So they are all acronyms that mean we need to do something to comply to a certain checklist, to a certain set of documents for the environment, for social, for governance. So it becomes like a standard protocol that the whole world agrees that these are standards that we should all comply and abide to because they are for the greater good. So in that sense of scheme, where we talk about governance on that overarching center, so that's worldwide, right? Where we have all these global standards, as I may call it, even though some countries may favor certain over the others. So when we trickle down, say, to your own specific organization, when we look at those governance rules, they do not just talk about the environment. They don't just talk about how many taxi fares have you taken or how many Grab rides you have done to contribute to your carbon count. We talk about your supply chain. Are we looking at good labor practices? Are we indulging in modern slavery? Where are your sources actually coming from? So all of those actually form part and parcel of your organization reporting. It's not just about the environment. A lot of emphasis is about social today. So you may ask me, so Wei Hui in JLL, you're doing real estate. What kind of modern slavery are we talking about? No, we do not engage. I do not get illegal workers. No, don't get me wrong. But what about the supply chains? What about the contractors and vendors that you use? You see, so it all trickles down. So as you can imagine, one business that may be seemingly detached from something like child labor or slavery, etc., you may have an indirect link. So that's where the overarching governance comes in every industry. And that's where the global governance, ESG kind of reporting or standards becomes relevant because they do impact your business in one way or another.
Thank you, Wei Hui. I think ESG or sustainability is not all about carbon, right? Of course, carbon is one of the key components in order to prevent the global warming. Of course, there are other gases as well. But beyond that, there's one more key element. We really look at it, social good. Because why we are doing it is all for humanity. To sustain the humanity, making sure the quality of life for the people are good. Whether they live in rural or city, right? So my question to all the panelists here, right? If you can share some case study or what you really doing from a company perspective in embracing, yes, social good, both for employee, internal stakeholder, and also for the community around where you operate as a company, or how you guide your customers to making sure that they have a proper social inclusivity to sustain for the longer term. Yeah, Geeta, you want to start?
Yeah. So we are a relatively young company, so we are learning from the giants like JLL and so on. What we are trying to do, not just one of my observations also in because I'm relatively new here, is that DEI is still a gap in this industry. I'm sure I think Wei Hui is one of the very few women in this, for that matter, in terms of DEI inclusion. I'm sure you can talk a lot more than me. So that is something that I feel that can contribute to the social good of the ESG, so that this diversity will bring in new ideas to ESG as a concept. You mentioned about 10 years ago, there were no takers for ESG as an industry. But today, yes, because of all the action that's happening around this topic, we have investments here. But is enough happening on DEI? That is a question that I want to ask you guys.
Yeah, I think let answer. But I think fortunately today the panel is properly balanced.
Right. That's thanks to you.
At least for that matter, we are balanced. Thank you. Yeah, please. Either Kenneth or Wei Hui, touch on it.
Okay, so I think DE&I, in terms of diversity, equality, and inclusion. I mean, just in case the audience is wondering what DE&I, because I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, right? We talk about this all the time, and we assume everyone knows what the acronym stands for in certain ways. So when we actually talk about that, it's about equal wages. We're talking about fair treatment, regardless of where you come from, or if you're male or female, and so on and so forth. So, in the construction industry, from say where I came from, when I was in school, I was like the minority. Yeah, it was a very largely male-dominated industry. Okay, but things have since changed, and these days we see some form of gender balance. But I think today's forum is not really talking about gender balance, but the whole point is about how DE&I has formed such importance in the S of the ESG in our sustainability journey. It just simply means that equality for everyone. Okay, equal opportunities for everyone. And it doesn't just need to meet that, because you're going to get a job because you're a female. You're not going to get the job because you're male. No, we are not talking about that. Because, I mean, that totally contradicts what DE&I actually means. So we are really referring more on ethics. We are talking about social and the mental health, wellness of the employees and everyone in the organization. So, for example, in JLL, we have won, it's our 13th year, where we are the most ethical company in the world. Okay, so this was accredited by the US. And we are also 10th year in running for DE&I. So what it really means is that when we actually embark on a journey with an employee or with everyone in the workforce, we are looking at equal opportunities, and it is about that person best fit for the job. Okay, so this is really where the S factor in the ESG, in D&I, actually talks about. So no matter which reporting standard we are referring to, that's essentially the bottom line on how we actually treat this whole system.
I know we are running out of time, but let Kenneth wrap up
No, I think I
on
just
this?
have one line to add. I think we ought to listen more to the women because they cover the blind spots that we cannot really look out for as guys. So I think, yeah, let's listen more to the women, be it at work or at home. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we had a very fabulous discussion today in the context of ESG and sustainability to the businesses. And let's give a big round of applause for all the contribution by the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.